we tend to forget that in having a child, our job is the one with the developed neocortex and, these things, is to learn how to communicate with them, not teach them how to communicate with us.
Friends, thank you so much for joining us today. I have the privilege, the honor to sit down with Greg Anderson and chat about the dadhood and many other things. So Craig, first and foremost, thank you so much for jumping on the show.
It's my pleasure. I'm happy to be here and communicate about this important topic, this dads and men and feelings and kids with feelings. I mean, who knew that, kids in this generation would be more emotionally connected than we were at that age. So I'm happy to be here.
Wow. I love that you said that. We're going to jump in. Usually, before I even allow the audience to know who you are, can we just chat about that for 1 second? The fact that you
100%.
said having children, connecting more with their feelings today. How have you witnessed that?
Well, I'll give you a really great story in my own life. So I have a daughter who now is 13. And about 3 or 4 years ago, she was going through some emotional, I would say, traumas or issues. She's got stomach pains and she's stressed. And, being somewhat connected myself, I started asking the questions like, how come she's, feeling all of this stress? And I was having conversations with her. And I started finding out that the more that she was hanging around her other girlfriends, her 10-year-old girlfriends who had parents with other problems and stresses and would cry, she was internalizing these. And I was like, wow, maybe what I'm doing right now is not communicating with her in a way that she's understanding. Because I've tried to have conversations about the difference of empathy versus compassion before. And so I went out and I started reading other books, and I picked up a book called The Children of Now, which is a psychologist that she communicates with adults how to retrain adults to speak to kids with certain, you could call it superpowers, empathy, or an exaggerated empathetic person. They're just taking on a lot, but they don't know the difference between theirs and somebody else's. So I picked up a book and said, great, I want to learn how to communicate with a kid that has an emotional IQ that's way higher than mine was, because this is just who we are in this reality, and learn how to have a conversation. And so one night I'm laying in bed with her and we're doing our read time and just, relaxing before sleep. And I said, honey, do you know the difference between your emotions and somebody else's? And she goes, I don't. So, okay, great. Well, it's when you have a conversation with so-and-so girlfriend and her parents are having a hard time, do you feel that pit in your stomach come up? And she goes, I do. I said, the question I want you to ask yourself is it yours or is it theirs? And in that moment, she melted in this way that I've never felt before. Her mind and her spiritual connectedness and her center realized for a moment that all that she's been holding wasn't hers anymore. And she just fell into the bed, relaxed. She just was in my arm and just went in. And from that moment on, she's never had the problem of understanding the difference between my emotion and your emotion by having a conversation. And in this world, in the dad world that we're communicating about, I don't know that many people taught men at our age or at that age, not only how to connect with emotions and feelings, but the difference between yours and mine. When you're married, the difference between her emotion and your emotion is vastly different. And if you can't tell the difference in your own body, then you're just going to hold on to these massive amounts of negativity that never needed to be there because it wasn't yours.
Wow. Man, Greg, talking about starting it off strong, my friend. I absolutely love that. I'll be straightforward. I've never even considered that before, and currently I'm dealing with my 5-year-old. In his situation, he gets really anxious, social anxiety already, and talking about starting kindergarten in these times, which we don't really understand how we're navigating through them. We're kind of just going and how to best be a support rather than fully trying to parent. I feel like when we say parent, right, it's this whole narrative that we have to be forcing or driving. And it's like, this is another human being, right?
Yeah, did you ever go down the route of like the five love languages or these things?
Yes.
Really great conversation around this book is, and as adult, somebody who's been married or even divorced who's wanted to say, how do I communicate with my spouse or the opposite sex? We tend to forget that in having a child, our job is the one with the developed neocortex and these things, is to learn how to communicate with them, not teach them how to communicate with us. It's a vastly different conversation because they can only process information the way that they're currently capable. And we're saying, hey, son or daughter, what I need you to do is not communicate with me in a way that you understand. I want you to communicate with me, little 5-year-old or 10-year-old or whatever, in a way that I can understand you. And so the beautiful thing that we can do as a parent is just realize that every kid is a unique being who has unique abilities, that they're still trying to grasp what this is, reality and growth and parents. So if we can learn to translate for them, learn to communicate on their level back, it's a whole different world. Like just off the top of my head with your son going through these scenarios, having the conversation, the difference between nervousness and excitement is huge. They both come from the same place. You both come from the solar plexus, right? We know that, I forget who said it, the difference between nervousness and excitement is breath. Like when you're nervous, you breathe back, you suck in. And when you're excited, you breathe out. You're like, I'm growing. And so having the ability to find that moment to communicate with your 5-year-old and just ask the difference and training them the emotional IQ at that age. I mean, you're talking 15 years of therapy later on, just knowing that now.
Yes. That's so great. And it's like you either put in the work today or you're going to put it in at some point, right? Or later on
Yeah.
the road.
Yeah. I think the difference is too, is the purpose for your podcast, the purpose for being on here is to have, different avenues of ways of learning to communicate and raise, children that are not only good for community or society or good for themselves, but also that have an emotional IQ that perhaps we just didn't have back then.
Mm-hmm.
We picked up our guns and toys, and it's so interesting anyway because we couldn't even compare upbringing now versus an upbringing then. We didn't have COVID. We didn't have governmental systems falling apart. We didn't have, my dad worked for a steel mill. He was laid off in the 80s. We went through a lot of financial struggles. So there could be some of those aspects, but the world just isn't the same place. So how could we even think that we could parent the same way that we were parented?
Right. But yet we don't have that conversation going on a lot. It's just generation with no actual flexibility or adaptability, if you will.
Yeah, it's cool. Science is proving some really cool things right now. And about 10 years ago, they learned something underneath the eye. It's called a mirror neuron. And it's the reason that we can learn by watching. Think about caveman 500,000 years ago or 100,000 years ago. And he's being chased by a saber-toothed tiger up over the hill and another caveman standing on top. And if the guy standing down and see the tear in that guy's face and start to run, he's the snack, right? He's eaten. So humans develop this mirror neuron, and it's the reason that we've been able to evolve where, say, like an animal like a deer doesn't. A deer only knows its lifespan. It can only learn as much as its death and its birth. But humans, we keep evolving because we get to adapt by learning what our parents or our communities or our churches or society, we learn from this mirror neuron, and it goes straight in and it stores as subconscious programmings to say, this is how we should act, this is what we should do. Really cool things with people that have lost arms and legs. They originally started adapting or doing little plugins in the back of the skull so that when somebody would see an animatronic hand would move, trying to help somebody that had lost an arm. They're plugging it into the mirror neuron, and it's now moving at the same speed as a hand instead of a second slower. So that storyline is just to show that this is how we grew. And if we don't change the storyline, if we don't change the actions that our kids are seeing until their age of 10 and 13, they're going to be the exact same in the exact same scenario, but in a different world. So what you're doing is vitally important.
Do you, wow, when you were talking about that, so it's that mirroring effect, right? We're able to see that way. How do you believe that as a parent, we can start implementing that more into our children's life?
Yeah, it's such a great topic, because this goes straight into the personal growth space. I don't like the word personal development. Development means that there's something broken and I need to build upon. And the moment that you think something's broken, it is. So I steer away from those words. Fix myself, working on, they just the words themselves have so much weight to it that I steer away. And this is partially part of that conversation. Is it's really easy to say, do as I say, not as I do, that thing that we've heard for so long. As a parent, it gets to be vitally important to realize that they learn more by seeing than by doing. Definitely more by seeing. The other thing that's important to know that in the human development of the brain, most subconscious, we have our conscious actions, and then we have our subconscious actions. Just like, driving a car home from work, and all of a sudden you realize you didn't know how you got there. Right? That's a subconscious program. Well, we have thousands of them running every day to tell us who we are, what we should eat, how we should act in a certain circumstance. And those stop developing at like ages between 8 and 10 years old. So as a parent, to just grasp the concept that whatever you're showing them up until that age, that could be television, that could be the way that you act, the way that you treat parents, grandparents, anything. Those are stored, and they're not accessed again until that kid becomes an adult, because they're not in that situation ever again. They see mom and dad, or whatever situation happened, but they don't need to recall that information that's stored in the neocortex, or stored in those inside that framework, until they get in the scenario. And then that one time you're like, wow, I just sounded like my dad. That's where it came from, but it was stored 30 years ago.
Wow. So important for the listeners to understand that,
Yeah.
to really grasp that. So you said you don't use the term like fix or to development. It's not personal development. So do you call it personal growth, and what terms do you use to help that language?
Well, growth is a great one. I tend to steer away from most of them. So I started in this world, I don't know, in the personal development space, and that world was many years ago, like 20 years ago, with some Tony Robbins things. And then about 7 years ago, I got into the men's only personal development groups, helped start one, then a second, and then I ran a third one of my own over about a 4-year period of time. These were your high-end, expensive, styles. And it worked really well. But we were in that mindset in the masculine mindset, it's always like there's a cause and a reaction, and I can fix it. And you get into that, you could call it feminine energy, but it's also, as a human, we can map and watch a heart. It has a negative polarity and a positive polarity. The pole of the earth has a negative and positive. So whether you want to use masculine, feminine, or negative and positive, it doesn't really matter. These are facts of a body. But when you get into that, the feminine mindset, the feminine flow, or the negative polarity flow, you realize that there doesn't have to be an answer to anything. It just kind of is what it is. Have you ever had a conversation with a spouse where you're just like, we've talked about this 10 times and we came up with the result 10 times. Why are we having this the 11th time? And there's nothing wrong with that conversation at all. It's just, it happens to be that other person's in that feminine flow. And so in the masculine world, there was always a fix and a development, and you're broken, right? The way to break a man in the middle of a personal weekend, like a very aggressive, warrior-esque type style, is to teach them they're wrong, that you're broken. There's something wrong with you. There's something wrong with the way you're thinking. There's something wrong with the way you're acting, the way you're being, and I'll prove it to you, because look at your result right now. And you can break anybody in those aspects. But when you tell somebody that you're wrong and the only way to be right is to follow my way, you're not actually teaching them emotional like acuity or emotional IQ. You're just saying, here is a short fix. Now, there's nothing wrong with doing that. It's just that for my personal development or my personal growth, I hit a stage where I didn't want it to be so black and white, and it didn't need to be. And there's all these answers around the world and all of these gurus and mentors and different religions that had really great things to teach. And as that development happened over the next couple of years, there really is only one place of growth. If I can come to the place to say, you know what, Greg, you're perfect the way that you are right now. And how can I prove that? Because you are. Any other thing isn't true. I could wish I could want something more, but I would not be true. If I can come to the place that says, well, I'm the perfect parent that I am now. Is there growth opportunity? Yes. And if I can pick that out, then I can actually do it. But when I think that I'm broken and I'm a bad dad or a bad parent, I'm working from a negative deficit, like negative deficit inside your bank account, but you're trying to get a loan and buy these things and it just doesn't work. This one shift for me made me a better parent, because then if there's something that's going on in my kid's life and they're not getting the result that they want, they're fighting or it's just not happening, I can have a conversation with them about, well, nothing that you're doing is wrong. It's just not getting us the result. It was perfect. It was an example of something that we might not want to do in the future. And let's find some other way for you too, instead of, coming down super hard and telling them they're wrong and what you're thinking is, it's this, but it also comes from me, because if I didn't believe it, then I couldn't teach it.
Man, I feel like I just want to sit here and chat with you for hours because I feel like there's so much knowledge. Because at the beginning, and I laugh because usually I introduce and allow the space for you to kind of give a backstory, and we've just been going,
Yeah.
and I'd love it because the flow. Where did this whole journey begin? Why, and like where are you at now? I know those are three different parts, but if you could elaborate on that.
Well, yeah, the journey was started, I grew up in a religious family. They got separated and divorced, and the whole family kind of separated. My father had passed away when I was young, and I was looking for an example. I wanted the mirror neuron teaching of a parent to teach me something. I made a lot of really interesting decisions that landed me in some, really interesting, hard scenarios. And I wanted to grow from there. My mid-20s, I decided I was going to go back to church and really study, because of the church that I belonged to at the time. And it's not that I don't belong to a church. I just belong to every church now, because I just keep studying and I love it. But in that moment, I was still looking for somebody to teach me, how to be a parent and how to be a father and how to be a good husband. And I went as far and as deep as somebody could in this religion. And I ended up that I personally had this really interesting thought pattern that said, Greg, if you make a lot of money and you have a hot wife, you'll be married forever and you'll be happy. Well, that was the societal programming for somebody who didn't grow up with a lot of money, right? That's just what you think. You're not going to be loved unless you make money. You're not going to have, this. And if you have a hot wife, that means this. And it didn't. And I got a divorce. I was at the end of that going, well, now what? So I called a friend of mine who during the mortgage collapse of the late 2000s, he went on this really big spiritual journey. I said, hey man, I see all these things that you have and what's going on. Will you teach me how to meditate? And he said, no, go buy a book. It's like, what? This sucks. I'm not going to buy a book. And about 3 months later, a month later, he called me back and said, hey, I have this idea. I want to put a group of a mastermind that's just men together. We'll meet once a week over video chat and just talk about guy things. That started that kind of masculine revolution. That was part of what is now known as Wake Up Warrior. Yeah. So we were in the first kind of group trying to figure out what that would be like. And I stayed in there for a couple of years, ratcheting up some of the meditation, ratcheting up some of the steps. Like if somebody's in a really bad place, they're very concrete steps that they can take on a daily basis to get them out of it. And then from that place, it's, you know, up to you to move on that kind of that spiritual community. But, you know, we hit the genesis of that, and I still wasn't feeling fulfilled. I was feeling like I could run through a brick wall, but I didn't understand, like, women have this veracity of love. They're like tigers. They can hold on and latch for dear life. And I didn't know that. So I said, okay, great. I'm going to hire some feminine coaches to teach me not how to be a woman, but how to have the negative polarity fully activated in my body. And what are these things that are called emotions? How do I find them in my body? And what do they mean? What are they trying to tell me? What are all the things, those blind sides that were missing? And that led for a couple of years. And from that point on, I went everywhere in the world. I've lived in the jungles. I moved from the US. I sold everything that I had here, moved to Mexico to study the Mayans for a year, and just did this thing. It was a really cool scenario because my kids were getting to an age as a divorced dad where they had things after school almost every day. And as a divorced dad, your times are like Wednesday and every other weekend. Well, when you start adding in school and activities, that gets cut. And then when you consider that it doesn't matter who you are, it takes about a day and a half for you to really get into a movement with them, to really feel them again. Because after they've been gone for 4 days or a week and a half, you're just trying to get in that groove. So I had a conversation with my former spouse and her husband and said, guys, I want to go. I'm having these dreams about the Mayans. I'm working on the software program. I just want to go for a while. How would it work if I left, was gone for 4 weeks, and I'll come back and I'll Airbnb something in your city because I didn't live in the same city, and would have the kids for a week? And they're like, that sounds really interesting. And so we started that process. And what I learned is that week time as a single dad or as a divorced dad that I got in those blocks was worth more than the more sporadic timelines. So it worked well, which turned into something completely different, because then 6 months later, I ended up staying in their house whenever I would come into town. COVID hit, and I leased a unit, a place that was next door to where they're at. So where I'm at sitting right now, it's a door away from where my kids live, and I've been here for the last 6 months. And it just kept leading these places. I lived with monks. I did all of these studies to try to figure out how to be more of a whole, complete person, instead of just saying, well, I'm a man, I should think this way. Because, you know, I was taught that you had to be masculine and there wasn't feelings. And then I said, okay, well, how do I integrate feelings with masculinity? And it just kept snowballing into this really great component until at this moment in time, I consider myself a whole being. Like I can operate just as well out of the feminine flow as I can masculine, and both have their place inside of a human that's trying to evolve through the middle of this world that's, you know, kind of tearing apart at the moment.
Yeah.
So that was a lengthy way of explaining how I got here through just self-discovery. And if I don't understand that, I'm going to find somebody who does and teach me. And a lot of times that meant, you know, not coaches here in the US. That meant going and staying in a, you know, self-sustainable community in Italy for a little while, or living with monks for a bit, or whatever it was. Because all of our ancient technologies and wisdoms they're valuable. Maybe not all the dogma, but the other ones are. And just embody it and learn it.
So this stuff is so fascinating. I mean, I'll be honest, I have the traditional job and then I'm trying to build this and some other things, and you get so caught up, and there is no separation where I feel like there's like an outlet, right? Of somewhere to be able to just go. And I know that that's a self-driven mindset, that there are outlets, there are things to go, but I've limited them because of this belief of having to constantly be there around for the family and do all these things. And I know that I'm not alone in that. And do you have any recommendations you would say for other dads that are listening that want to become more whole or want more spiritual like experiences, but don't really have the flexibility to leave for months or even maybe a couple days, you know?
Sure. You know, it's interesting. You brought up this really good point. Have you ever seen the movie, I just lost it, Doctor Strange?
I haven't seen it, no.
Okay, great. Well, there's a part in the movie where he's going on his spiritual journey, right? He's going to go learn magic somewhere. And he's about to walk into the door of this teacher. And the person that's talking to him just says, forget everything that you know. And Strange, the main character, looks at him like, what the heck are you talking about? Forget everything I know? No, I'm this professional doctor and I have these things and I have all these credentials and I have this all of this life. What do you mean by this? And through the rest of the movie, which I won't go through into, he's learning, just forget everything you know. So here was something really interesting. And this is not a question to you, but a thought process is, let's assume that there was something that you wanted to go experience. And do you think that you could have a conversation? A lot of times we say in our mind immediately, we're like, wow, I'd like to go on a 3-day yoga event. I don't know what that's like. I mean, when I met in Mexico, I met this beautiful, awesome banker, really cool guy. He decided that he wanted to go learn hula hooping for 3 days. And he did. I don't know why, but he did. So he went to his partner and just said, honey, do you mind if I take off for 3 days? I'm going to be hula hooping with women for 3 days. Do you mind? She's like, no, I'll hold down the fort. I'm okay with that. And so in that conversation about becoming whole or being whole, it's not necessarily trying to fill holes. It's just experiencing. And could you be available for your spouse in a committed relationship if she wanted to try something for a few days? And could she, and not worry about the jealousies, which don't belong anywhere in marriages, right? But could it be possible that the only reason that things aren't available is because immediately we think, well, I've got little kids, I've got a job, and I have a wife, and there's probably no way that we could figure this out. Instead of just being open to the possibility that it could, maybe there's a way, and maybe there's not, but at least I'll have the conversation. That's the biggest opener for everyone, because I remember like being so scared, saying like, I'd like to go do something, and it wasn't with her, right? It wasn't with my former spouse. And so internally thinking, she's immediately going to feel bad about this. She's going to be mad about this. Like, I'm leaving her out. But in truth, I just wanted to become a better person. And I just didn't have I'd call it the nerve back then, and probably the confidence in myself around other people as well, to be able to just have a conversation and say, hey, you know what? I don't know that I'm going to like this thing or not. But I'd like to go try it. And I think this is going to make me a better person and a better father and a better husband. It has nothing to do with or without you. It's just about, me being able to show up more or more complete. And are you down with that? And if not, then those are conversations to have. But I think that's where it starts.
I love that. I love that. Just creating that space, being open, being willing to just, like you said, start the conversation without having a preconceived notion of what the answer is going to be before it even starts.
Yeah.
Which puts people then in a certain kind of energy level, if you will, going into it,
100%.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. She knows when you walk in the door and you're timid, she's like, something's wrong.
Right.
You're just like, I just want to do this, but I feel bad about it. And so you're right. What you said is right. You drive the conversation before it even started.
Yeah. I love that. How often do you try to implement that same model with your daughter?
I would probably say in all of our conversations, we have a relationship now where 95% of it is just normal fun time. If in the event that something feels off, we have a conversation. We can have those open type of conversations. A great friend of mine turned me onto some teaching from something a long time ago called Life Book. I don't even know if they exist anymore. But for married couples, we would teach this inside of our programs where, once a month, could be every 2 weeks, it depends on the couple, where you schedule, call it your board meeting, right? You schedule time, an hour, 2 hours, a half hour, where those times are the times where you put, in Stephen Covey's words, important, but not critical, right? They're important things to talk about, something critical, a broken arm, school, I have to talk about it right now. But times where we can put these other pieces so that we know every other Thursday at 3:00, we're going to sit down and talk about those critical moments, the things that I might want to try, or something that's come up. And what it does is it frees up all the rest of the time and the mental capacity of you going, is this the right time to talk to her about? Is this the right time to talk to her about? I wonder if this is the right time to bring it up. And we remove those out of the regular conversation, so the regular conversation just be fun and flow, and put in a structure to say, let's talk about all these kinds of things. And a beautiful conversation that they would bring up in the middle of that was, on a scale of 1 to 9, how am I showing up as a dad? How am I showing up as a father? And having a kind of a preset conversation. You know, hey, sweetheart, if I ask you, and I'm assuming you're talking to your wife at the moment, or somebody's talking to their spouse, if I ask you, how am I showing up? And you say a 5, in that moment, I'm not asking you to tell me all the things I'm doing wrong. I'm asking you to creatively enhance me by saying, you know, here are 3 or 4 things that I see that I could feel if you did them, you would be a 10. So it's not an open for, you're showing up a 5 because you're a jerk and you're not doing these things, which brings up a negative conversation. But it also means that if you have that conversation with somebody and they say a 5, but they can't give you any feedback to get you to a 10, then you're just a 5. Then say, sweetheart, there's nothing I can do. If you can't help me understand what would make me a 10 in your eyes in this moment, then I can't do anything about it. Can we pass until next month? Because a lot of times we want a concrete answer, but most of the time there might not be one. And that's okay. It's great. I'll be a 5. Fantastic. If you can come up with something that can help me, perfect. And then you can have those same conversations with the kids. How am I showing up as a dad? I thought I was a 10 and I just found out I'm a 2. What can we do in this moment to help? And these are just ways to ratchet these beautiful relationships up even higher.
Wow. I love that. I love what you said there too, of just acknowledging I might just be a 5 right now. And that's okay. Unless there's an opportunity for me to see how to become a 10, I just accept my 5.
Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with it. It just is what it is.
Yeah.
Because that could be something that's going on in their life and it doesn't have to do with you. They just don't feel connected. And so it opens the conversation to have that emotional acuity grow.
Sure.
Like, if you can help me, I'll show up for you as a 10 all day long. But if I don't know it's wrong, I can't. And I'm not in a position to just try a bunch of random things, because we've all proven what happens when we just try a bunch of random things. There's no result. And we just feel let down on both sides of the table.
So do you think part of this whole, just call it like journey that you're on, this, well, is it okay if I say like a holistic journey where you said you
100%.
feel, okay, so this holistic journey that you're on, how do you feel? Do you feel like you constantly go back and check that yourself, to your point? Like, am I 10? Do you create metrics or measurements for you to be able to identify if you're not feeling like whole each day, and how you can rebalance that?
I do have my routines. For years, I ran the programs of scoring. Did I do this certain thing every day? You know, following back into, because it was in the middle of Lions Not Sheep, it was Wake
Okay.
Up Warrior. My program was Awaken the King. These things all followed along the lines of, you know, something to do with your physical body, something to do with your spirituality, with your family and your business, and they kind of grew from there. There's a lot of women's programs that follow along the same lines. So if somebody is lost and they're just like, I feel like I'm missing, you know, this thing. Scoring and analytics are amazing and they're required. Beautiful thing in like the Buddhist traditions or mantras, meditations, and they say mantras, right? A really beautiful statement that I love is, you say the mantra until you become the mantra. And once you become that, you don't need to say it anymore. So if I have a core 4 or whatever you want to call it program, and I've ran it for 5 years and I don't miss that, I don't necessarily have to score myself on a daily basis, but it's so ingrained in me that if I'm missing something, then it's pretty quick to go back and say, God, I haven't done Byron Katie's The Work in the last couple of months. I haven't pulled my workouts the same way. Something that's ingrained in me was meditation. I just haven't changed it. I've studied huge sums on different continents and found the things that worked for me. I don't necessarily miss that ever. I might miss out working out for a month, especially during COVID.
Mhm.
And I knew what was happening with my body. And I'm like, okay, great. It's time to correct those scenarios. So I think anytime you want to change something, it requires consistency, 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 no matter what. And the moment that you become so consistent that it becomes you, maybe you don't have to track it so much. But if you're not consistent in something, tracking and analytics 100%.
I love that. You talked about meditation right there. Do you still practice a form of meditation every day?
I do. During the middle of all the Mayan journeys, I was down there studying how how they kept civilizations together for thousands of years. And I was studying who was the people that would talk to the people on a regular basis. And it wasn't their governors. It was always their spiritual leaders, right?
Mhm.
And in the middle of it, I was writing a piece of software, which is now, it's a software program called One Mind. And One Mind is a live streaming group meditation or prayer application. That means
Wow.
there's no recordings. And if people want to get together, they can get together and stream them worldwide. Um, and so I studied huge sums of modalities of different frameworks. And I ended up finding one from this. She's a she's one of my, you could call her one of my spiritual teachers. She's a Native American grandmother that was trained Hindu. So she has this huge, vast knowledge of like old school technology.
Yeah.
And the one that works the best of anything I've ever found is if you were just to imagine for a moment that there's a clock about 6 inches from your face, and it's not a digital, it's a round one with the hands. And then when you close your eyes and picturing it out again about 6 inches out there, if you can move both hands to 12 o'clock and keep them, that's what you would call 0 point. And our minds move so fast that most scenarios, you'll never realize how many times the clock's moving. In the human psychology, every number means something, which we won't go through into here right now. But you might watch in 5 minutes that your clock goes to 3, to 6, to 7, and it only goes 3, 6, or 7. And it moves there every couple of seconds. But if I do a meditation that's a guided meditation or music, I'm never going to notice that the clock keeps moving. And as long as the clock keeps moving, then you're never stable in a 0 position. And the ancient traditions, when they talk about having like a Buddha mind or a Christ consciousness, it's
Mhm.
the ability to be in conversation with you and have nothing that you say stick. You could call me the worst names possible and just have it move by. And what it means is you're available to actually be in this moment to have a conversation. Where most of the times you're in a conversation with somebody and you can see that they're flipping, their brain's moving so quick, but it goes so fast that they don't even realize it. So 0 point meditation is just that. It's flexing the mind muscle strong enough to keep it at 12 o'clock for at least 5, 10, 15 minutes a day. Um, and when you do that, you'll find huge sums of those subconscious programs that we talked about from when we were 8 disappear, because the mind is constantly trying to resolve what it's what it's seeing. It's saying, oh, well, we saw this scenario before. Where did we see it? And it goes back and it pulls it forward and says, well, the last time we saw it, this was the outcome. And so it's telling you what the next answer is. If we never realize how fast that's happening, then we never have an opportunity to come up with a new solution. I did a lot of plant medicine for a little while. I haven't in a while, but I've done the jungles and the things like this. And one thing that it taught me, which is stuck, and I don't participate in any anymore for a really great reason, but when you get outside of the linear thinking forward to back, and you can go unilateral thinking, then you're able to have new solutions. And so even in meditations, it's telling you, if I can stop this, then I can come up with anything, any possible solution, which is what I had learned there. And then I implement it into like meditations and these points, because I don't want the next answer to be the same. I
Mhm.
want it to be something new. I want it to be something better than it was before. And it doesn't mean what before was wrong. I just want it to be better.
This is so good. This is so good. I love this because there's so much value in these messages. Like, because I don't believe we can be the best versions for our children if we can't be kind and the best version to ourselves.
100%.
Right? So any tools like this to where someone could say, you know what, I need to get the two hands to sit there for, even if I can get it a minute each day,
Yeah.
and I can start seeing some things. Maybe the reason I'm acting the way with my children or my child or whatever is something I'm not even aware of. It happened to me at 7 and it just was locked away. And now I'm able to see it and move out, to the
Yeah.
sides rather than, front and back. This is so good. So I just want
Yeah.
to thank you for these tools. Just in the middle of the session, I just want to thank you because you've put in the work. A lot of people, um, want to give advice without putting in the work. You can tell that you've put in the work to see these things and go through these experiences.
Yeah.
How do you incorporate this like meditation, this present moment
Mhm.
with your child when your child's doing something that's going against what you believe is like right or wrong? That those.
Yeah, you just brought up really cool conversation. The conversation of right or wrong, anyway, right, is a conversation of a judgment, and it's a past thought. Now, obviously, it's easy to say, "Hey, that stove is hot, and if you touch it, it's going to burn." Right? We want to say that's a right or wrong, right?
Sure.
Don't do that because I know concrete that you're going to touch it and burn your hand. It's an easy conversation to have. But even coming from my kid is doing something which I see as wrong, is creating a preconceived conversation of how I need to change what they're thinking and doing in order for them to be in the right. And that right and wrong, man, that has been so programmed into us. Like, oh, it's such a deep conversation that just removing the words right or wrong and replacing with does it work or does it not is life altering to yourself and even a child. It's not a balance of yes or no, good or evil, right or wrong, because that was somebody else's mindset. Do we want them to kill somebody? No, definitely. That doesn't work. Um, the Ten Commandments were pretty awesome. But the components about every thought process and everything being right or wrong, it's this like never ending loop of self-judgment because you're always judging against. So that is a piece. But the other side of it is a really valid conversation is how do you have a conversation? You see, like I see my 13-year-old doing something which isn't going to provide a great result for her, and how do you have that open conversation, right? Yeah, first was for me personally was just to remove the judgment because maybe maybe she's smarter than me. Maybe it's not going to be there. But it's also just saying, hey, honey, I want to just have a conversation with you right now. I don't know what your outcome is going to be, but in my experience, these things have happened. And if you go down and you start to not feel good about this scenario or situation, if it starts to feel out of control or you're in a situation like, I mean, she's 13 and there's scenarios here where I live where kids are drinking and they're smoking weed, right? So having those conversations with her when she was like 6 and 7 and 10 and just saying, you don't need to be in a situation. And as your dad, if you get into something where you don't feel comfortable and you voiced your opinion, I don't feel comfortable with this, I'm here to pick you up. Like, there's no reason that you ever need to stay in a scenario that you don't feel comfortable. And does that make what your friends are doing wrong in our eyes? Do we think they're bad? No. Is it a good choice? Probably not. But that's for them and their parents. But let's have an open dialogue about what feels good and how do we remove you from situations where you're not going to feel like you're being judged by other kids. And if you are, it is what it is. But we want to be able to remove you out of there. And it's happened. Those exact scenarios have happened. And, a month later, one scenario in particular, one of her girlfriend's parents that live in the neighborhood that we live in, they found a beer, like an empty beer can at 13 in her closet. And her parents are like losing her mind. And Ella's in the middle of it, which is my daughter's name. She's in the middle of it going, well, there has been times where her cousins or other people have, brought things over and I just go home. I'm like, that's awesome. There's nothing wrong with them. I'm like, and are you seeing what's happening? She's like, yeah, I don't really want anything to do about that because we've had those conversations about these emotional intelligent conversations about the problems that can come with it. And then the physiology of what happens when you're just a growing gruel and you start to add other chemicals into your body. And it's just, there's a lot of things that can go wrong. And do you want that? The laws of probabilities are going to say that something's going to happen. And so it's been having more open conversations instead of more black and white conversations.
Sure. That makes me like, I don't want to really hit on COVID. I mean, we're all going obviously through it. We all understand what's happening. But with that said, I think that there's some valid points that I would just love your insight,
Yeah.
the dads. Having open conversations about what we're going through right now. How are you as a dad dealing with that?
The COVID conversations. Yeah. It's been really unique because I have my own understandings, and geez, it doesn't matter what ancient or what religious sect that you go into books that are 3,000 and 4,000 years old, and they're talking about this, their prophecies are about this 10 years. Started at 2020, will end at 2030. You go old enough, they're like listing out even sicknesses. It's pretty incredible what's listed out. So I have my own philosophies about living above sicknesses. If I'm healthy and there's nothing wrong with me, meaning that I don't inherently have a lung problem, which would be scary at this point in time. I'm going to continue doing everything that I can to be as healthy as possible. But we've had our conversations about allowing, we could talk about media, about allowing outside influences take control of your personal energy and your personal mind. It's great to be informed. When you go too deep and you start giving all of your attention into things that you can't control, we can't control who gets sick, right? Yeah. But if I think about it, then I'm actually giving more of my energy and my personal, whatever you want to call it, your energy, your thought processes, your emotions, your eternal flame, whatever that is, you're giving it to something that you don't have control over. So we stay really educated about what's going on. We have conversations about it. But as far as things that are going outside the world, I can't provide whether or not a vaccine is good. My kids aren't going to have one. Yeah. But I can't provide it because I'm not the diet or the doctor in the middle of it. So me having many conversations about what's happening without a choice in front of me isn't doing this any good. So in the middle of this, we've had these conversations. School's about to start again. Yeah. And this is the first year my daughter's been in a charter school. My daughter and son have been in a charter school, and she's graduated past that. So she's getting ready to go into a public junior high. And this actually came from my 10-year-old son, where he came in the other day. My decision is they have the opportunity to be remote or homeschooled, but remote, through the education system through the first quarter. And I'm not sending him back to school. And my son came in and says, Dad, why don't you want me and Ella to go back to school? And I said, well, sweetheart, this actually has nothing to do with you. My piece is with so much influx, and school's already hard for a 10-year-old or a 13-year-old anyway. And if I have the opportunity to put you in an environment where the teachers don't know what's going on, the school board doesn't go on, government pressures about where are you in masks 24 hours a day? Are you social distancing? All of these are putting grown-up problems on top of your already stressful learning environment. I just don't want it for the first quarter. Let's just see what happens. Let it meld over a little bit and figure that out. And I know that you want to play with your friends. I know you want a social life, and you haven't had one all summer, and that sucks. This conversation that I'm having with my 10-year-old is not about you, my 10-year-old. This is about what's going on and how I want you to not be in the midst of all of that extra stress and problems. He's like, oh, okay, great. Thanks for explaining to me. And he's totally fine. So it's these kinds of conversations which are not necessarily am I having adult conversations, but we're raising some emotional acuity or some of their emotional IQ around it, saying, here's why. And the other parts, they don't have anything to do with you, and I'm not going to discuss politics with you as a kid.
Sure.
But here is my choice.
Yeah. Oh, it's so good. It's so important, because I feel like everyone's looking for the answer, right? We're all looking for answers as parents, as individuals. Just for someone, just tell me what to do, and then I'll feel better. But then you start realizing that, are you really looking for their answer, or are you trying to grab enough information, like you said, so you can come to your own
Yeah.
conclusion, right?
Yeah. It's 100%. And right now what's interesting that's happening is it doesn't matter what side of the fence you're on. You could be, pro-mask or no mask. You could be Democrat, Republican. You could be man, woman, whatever. There's so much uncertainty. And so many people want a concrete answer. They want the government to create an answer. They want it themselves, whatever, that might be. And maybe the answer is right now is there's no answer.
Mm.
And if you're okay with it, there's not a concrete answer, then all possibilities are possible. And we can move and flow through whatever happens over the next year. But if I'm internally saying, I need an answer to this now, and there's not one, what do you think that does to us emotionally?
Yeah, because I think that inner battle can be more detrimental than what's happening externally, right?
Always the person in the mirror can cause you more conflict
Oh man,
than anybody else.
yeah. This is so good, Greg. Man, there's so much. It's funny. I actually had to come into work today, so doing this on my break. But I have a deck at home it's called like "What's the Word?" And it's just this
Mm-hmm.
random deck of cards, and it asks more in-depth questions because I believe that like the surface level questions don't really get us anywhere,
Mm-hmm.
right? But you get to ask some more in-depth questions, really to learn about people, like how they tick. So I don't have them in front of me, but I kind of want to come up with something on my
Yeah,
own here and ask you if you're okay with that.
100%.
Awesome. We've jumped in so much about this whole holistic approach, having both like the polar up, the positive, the negative, masculine, feminine side, like all together. What then, Craig? What was your aha moment that you needed both in your life?
Mm. Well, the original driving force of saying why I wanted it was because I just didn't feel whole. Like it didn't matter what mountain I climbed, whether it was a physical mountain or a metaphysical mountain, it didn't matter. I just kept pushing. And I would get there and I would hit that goal and say, is there more? Maybe my goal was too small. And so it started with this repeating process that had happened through my adult life, a certain level of success, and then go, wow, okay, great, I got that. Now what? I don't feel whole. Um, there must be something missing. So that was the first aha. Is after a dozen times, it just said, well, maybe that's not the answer I'm looking for. Maybe it's not a bigger house. Maybe it's not another car. Maybe it's because these were driving factors, right? And it's easy, I think, for people to grasp on that. So that was the first one that said, well, maybe there's, something more. And then the real big aha is, it's been in studying nature, and I laugh because the moment that I said this, when I lived in Mexico, there's ants because I lived in the jungle, right? And I lived in an apartment complex that was in the jungle. Um, and there's not a lot of amenities, and I had these ants that came into my apartment. And my first thought was kill them all, just kill them. And then my thought was maybe I should watch them for a little while. And over about 3 weeks, literally 3 weeks, every day I would change where their food was. I would give them more sugar, less sugar, and I would adjust. I kept thinking, if I'm the creator, I'm the person that created all of this. If the ants came into my apartment, if a human came into my domain, would I just want to kill them all? Or would I start doing this? So I started having these really like nature-esque, like creator kind of conversations, and said, maybe what I should do is stop reading books that have been written inside this last 100 years and start reading books older than that. And maybe what I should do is start looking at nature and saying, how does nature evolve? And how come nature just seems to be nature? The tree isn't sad about being a tree. How is that possible? And when I started really going in that direction, it was part biology, part Stephen Hawking's, part religious, that showed me as a physical body and as polarities moving out of the heart system, you know, bouncing this. I have both. And even though I'm a man in a masculine body and I do manly things, and, you know, I'm not, in my sexual preferences, I'm a masculine man, right?
Sure.
I still have all these other functions. I still have all of these other thoughts and these emotions, but I've been hyper developed on one side. And is it possible that I was created by a creator that created a whole being, and I just wasn't utilizing some things? And it was that kind of opening conversation that just, wow, well, I don't think anything was created wrong. I don't think it was by accident. I think I'm supposed to be who I'm supposed to be. And was it possible if I utilize all faculties? And it was that thought that if I studied more of nature, or if I just allowed nature to teach me, it just, everything started making sense. Like, why would I not, if I were given, if I was given, why would I not?
Why would I not if I was given?
Mm-hmm. Great
Hmm.
gifts.
Oh man. And nature is such a great teacher. Like you said,
Yeah.
such a great teacher.
Those ants, they were awesome.
That's the best lie. I love that. Those ants are awesome. In that moment was it, I mean, you would never have experienced that, right? If you weren't able to step back a little bit and just
Yeah.
that thought process.
You brought it up in the beginning, which was really cool, about these emotions. Like, where am I feeling an emotion in my body, and this, and there's been so much sedation and training, whether it was TV, or it could be sedation, could be too much gym, it could be alcohol, it could be drugs, it could be that we just weren't taught to even see what those feelings and emotions are. That it's really scary when people start, you know, taking that on. It is from a masculine perspective, going, you know, and being in your feminine doesn't mean crying all the time either, but thinking, you know, well, my dad told me to man up. And if I for a moment ask myself, what emotion am I feeling? And where am I feeling it in my body? Like pinpointing it, not like just my stomach is upset, but is it a sharp pain? Is it a dull pain? Is it internal? If I start going down that route, somebody's going to call me a woman. They're going to call me a feminine. They're going to call me not masculine. And these words and these, and maybe not for all, but is this, if we could talk about the society as a whole, been so ingrained in us that it's really scary to go down there. If I become more fluid, if I'm not so rigid, you know, will she still love me, or will they still respect me, or will they, these are all these internal questions that get to be dealt with. But it's so important that that's how you get, you know, to the good fruit, right? We mow our lawn because we don't want weeds all over. It's going through those processes. And it's vitally important to be able to communicate with your kids, or to be a full, complete parent, because you're willing to step out and do something that's not comfortable. But we tell them all the time, you can be an astronaut, you can be a thing, but internally we don't do it. So it gets to be important to be willing to have the courage to step out on that ledge.
Love that. Stepping out of your own comfort zone in order to show your kids that it's okay as well, rather than just, as we do, like, you know, if you, whatever the saying is that parents use day in and day out with their children, it's like, that's only effective if you're the example also behind those
Yeah,
words.
100%,
Yeah.
100%. And it makes us all happier too. If we have less stress, we feel a little bit better. We're nicer to them. They're nicer to us.
Right?
Yes.
Okay, so one, I want to respect your time. I appreciate you jumping on
Oh, you're
this
great.
so much. This has been great. Um, any last parting advice that you would just have for dads listening to this right now? And it's not, doesn't have to be COVID related by any means, doesn't have to be any of that, but just something that you, as a father yourself, have experienced that's like, you know, that might just resonate with even one listener that could change their whole mind frame, you know?
Yeah, I actually, what comes to mind was just what we were just speaking about is, you know, don't be afraid to try something new.
Hmm.
Don't be afraid of what it might look like. And even if you try something that doesn't work for you, that's okay. At least you tried
Mm.
and thought, well, yeah, that's not my cup of tea. I'll do something different or whatever that is. But um, yeah, don't stop trying, especially in the education, trying to educate yourself to communicate with them on their level, who they are, the way that they communicate, because it's definitely not by default the way that we speak.
So good. So good. One thing you hit on before we jump off here, you talked about emotional intelligence,
Mhm.
which I also believe is so vital, not only to teach your children, but like just to work on yourself.
Mhm.
Any great advice or books or places people can go to get a little more information on how to manage that or open up to that more?
Yeah, if you wanted a book, Sid Guru, who's India from India, and he's a guru, he's a teacher. He has a book, which is that whole process about how to engineer the internal self. It's a great book. It's a great place to start. Directly, I would just tell people to set on their calendar 15 minutes or 5 minutes a day and do that whole 0 point, that clock at 12. Because what happens when we don't have emotional intelligence, it's because if anything that happens to us is happening to us right now. And we're like, oh, this is mine. This person just talked to me sharply at work. And so it must be against me. And when you can fall more into that 0 point, when you have a little bit of space, it's almost like putting a fishbowl on the top of your head where a conversation comes in and it hits the fishbowl and it gives you an extra second to realize, is this about me? Are they just having a bad day? Is there something I can assist them with? Whatever that is, that's where real emotional intelligence comes. It's not from learning more. It's from giving yourself an extra second of time to process all the data that's coming at you so that you can make the next right choice, which is the only thing that any of us can ever do. Just make the next right choice. No matter how bad life is, if you can just make the next one, you're going to be in a better spot. And you just keep making the next ones until you're there. That 0 point, just give yourself that 5 minutes. That's
Sure.
it.
I'm actually going to implement that myself. I've been trying to do more meditation in general, but I've never done that, and I'm gonna try to do that at zero
Cool.
point and see how it works. Greg, how do people that are really resonating with you and feeling your energy and your vibe, like how do they get a hold of you,
Yeah.
and connect in your world?
Social media is the best place. Instagram, it's at Greg W. Anderson. Facebook, it's at the same. Those are the best. My personal websites, I don't post a lot of information on it at the moment. I'm still in the middle of, I write software, and we provide solutions to problems about things that are going on. And so I keep my other world in there too. But social media is the best place. Just look me up, follow me, send me a message. If you have a question about something, I'm happy to respond as much as I can, um, and just assist. I'm not necessarily in that personal growth world anymore, but I'm just here to help.
Awesome. Greg, thank you so much for jumping on Carseats and Coffee today. You've added so much value to the listeners. I really appreciate your time and everything that you've brought to the show.
Appreciate it. Thanks for having me on. Thanks for giving me the opportunity.